This is a grouping matching logic game. It's with the Hindu deities, as you may have guessed from the questions I put in the chat here. So I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to give that game a shot, just in terms of doing the initial setup. You don't need to do all the questions associated, just the initial setup. I'll give you all 3-4 minutes. Let me know when you're done setting it up, and then we'll talk through it together. Okay, looks like a couple of folks are done setting up. If you're finding this is a bit overwhelming, you're certainly not alone. This is meant to be harder than average. I wrote this game specifically to illustrate what a much tougher than average logic game could look like. I modeled it and I was inspired by a couple of the following logic games I'm putting in the chat here. And so if you find this one a little bit too tough, that's okay. There are some relatively easier ones you can use to build up to this. I wrote this game to illustrate what a next level beyond those games, though, could look like if you're looking to practice with really difficult logic games to hone your skills. This game has a lot going on. We've got 4 students, 7 deities, and we are associating the deities with the students. We are matching them or assigning one to the other. We're not putting anything in particular in order here. There's no chronological component. There's no ranking opponent. We're simply matching the deities to the students. Now, if we look at the rules here, the rules give us more specifics about the deities than about the students. The first 3 rules talk about both deities and students, but the remaining rules all focus on specific deities much more so than specific students. So for that reason, I choose to make the deities my base in this logic game, and then I stack the students on top of them. You could do it the other way. It'd be perfectly fine to do that. And to some extent, these decisions can be arbitrary, but for me at least, I found it much easier to set it up with the deities as the base. So I would lay out 7 slots here. And then I would place the variables below them. So we have G, H, K, L, R, S, V. And then we'll place the rules on there and we'll stack and build as we go. So we have neither L nor R has Bobby, but G and K do. So simply, G is not going to be in the L or R rows or columns. B, Bobby, is not going to go there. But G and K will both have Bobby. H, K, S all have Pooja. H has at least 3 variables in its row. So I'll put 3 slots there. We already have P there. We could potentially go a bit higher for all we know right now. We'll see. It's fairly open-ended. And then they say K and exactly one other have exactly 2. So K is going to have exactly 2, meaning in this case, K is finished. It already had B. Has P as well. It's not going to have anything else. Then there is some other deity that has exactly 2, but we don't know who it's going to be. So you could just do XX, meaning same, with a box around it vertically to represent what K looked like, as well as one other. And yes, Iman, you can use a chart. Slots and charts are roughly equivalent. It's all a matter of your personal preference or style. But you could certainly do more. When I think chart, I think more of a grid, kind of like this. Then you could have like this with A, B, J, P, something like that. That would be totally fine too. It's a matter of personal preference and style. I like to do it the way I did on top, and so I'll continue with that. But if you prefer this because you think it's maybe cleaner, you could do like that and continue down like that. Totally up to you. Looks like Ariel's saying she also does chart. I think it's arbitrary. I like to have less ink whenever possible. And so to me, the way I just laid out has a lot more ink. The way I'm doing now with the slots has less ink. So to me, it feels cleaner, but it's up to you. I saw since Iman and Ariel, you both like charts. Would you mind, either of you mind sharing a bit more about why, either in this particular game or in general?
So I'll go ahead and share. That's just how I learned how to solve these games. Whenever I see multiple variables on each axis, I just think, oh, chart. And I laid out B, S, R, L, K, H, and G on the y-axis, and on the x-axis I have A, B, J, and P. And I just drew a chart, and I used like check marks. Like if it says H has P, then I find that box that corresponds to that spot, and I put a check there. And it says, for example, it says K can only have 2, so I've checked off B and P, and I just grayed out the other boxes.
Gotcha. Which one did you say was the y-axis?
So the y, I probably messed it up, but the y-axis I used G, H, K, etc.
Okay. Gotcha. So you're doing something like this.
Yes, exactly.
And then you're doing, and then you're going to have, like, for example, for A, you might do like, if A if G has A, then it's going to be a check there. If you know that H does not have A, it's going to be an X.
100%.
Gotcha. It looks like Madison did the reversal of this, where she put ABJP along the Y and GXLRSV across the X-axis. And that could work also. Again, that's arbitrary. Yeah, it is the same thing. And Matthew's making a point that if you like this style, a grid or graph paper might make it a little bit easier to save time so that you're not drawing all the lines. And graph paper is allowed, lined paper is allowed. And so if it helps you stay organized and keep it clean, that could work. I don't love the checks and X's things. I think it requires too much looking horizontally, looking vertically to interpret it. So I'd recommend keeping it more literal and minimal. So again, to go back to what I did earlier, where you're having either this style I did already here with the slots and just building up, or building down with lines like I drew out a second ago. But I wouldn't do the checks and X's. I think it just becomes a little bit more work to interpret it constantly. But play with it. That's my recommendation, though. Anika?
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with the chart one, but I just had a question regarding it for rules where they would be like, H has at least 3, or L and R or whatever it was has exactly 2. How would that be graphed in a chart form then? I don't know if they can answer that or not.
That's a good question. I mean, charts are not really my style, so I'm probably not the best person to answer that one. I would say that one for the Tuesday night study sessions where there are some folks attending who I think are using the chart style, and you could ask them directly. You might do something like, let's say, I'm just making this up here. You could do like H has 3 or 4 checks, for example, might be one way to do it. You could say L and R have 2 checks, maybe just write that off to the side. Or you could say, well, if there are 4 students, A, B, J, P, you could do 2 checks, 2 X's for each of them in that case. Might be a way to go about it. But yeah, it does. I like to represent as much visually as possible. And here with this style, I feel like I can do that because I'm saying H has at least 3. I've put 3 slots there, 1 for P and then 2 more open-ended. I'm allowing room to go further right now. I may or may not go further. As we'll see, there are some other rules that prevent having all 4, but it's something I would at least be thinking about. So you're right to ask the question. Now, let's see, where were we? I'll just continue with the setup here. We said third rule, H has at least 3. We got that. K and exactly 1 other have exactly 2. So that was the last thing I drew over here. At least 1 other has exactly 2. Then we have if V has a student, then H does not have a student. So we could say V requires not H, contrapositive H requires not V. I'm doing the contrapositive there. So to represent that concisely, I might do the double not arrow, which I don't usually love, but I think in this case it could be worthwhile. Basically to say that they are mutually exclusive. If you have H has something, then V will not have that thing. So I would do simply H and V mutually exclusive, cannot have the same student. So since we know that H has P, we know that V cannot have P. Separately, next rule, same thing. G and R are mutually exclusive. If G has something, then R does not. If R has something, then G does not. Represented concisely, we can again say double not arrow. G and R cannot have the same students. Next rule, L has at least 1 of the students that V does. And then I'll go back and draw in. Actually, no, I should stop and actually deal with that inference. G and R mutually exclusive. So G has B as in Bobby. Therefore, R cannot have B as in Bobby. It's already built in based on the first rule of the game. The first rule said R does not have Bobby. So that was actually already covered. There was a little bit of redundancy there. So we're good on that one, but we still have to keep the general rule in mind in case going forward we discover that other variables are on R, in which case they could not be on G, and vice versa. Next rule, L has at least 1 of the same students as V does. So L and V have at least 1 in common. So L and V must share exactly 1 or share more than 1. But there cannot be 0 overlap. There must be at least a little overlap between the two, is what that rule is saying. Nothing to draw on the diagram yet, but we may want to keep that in mind going forward. Final rule, any deity who answers P also answers B. So Puja, then Bobby. We could say P arrow B, but I might want to say P requires PB as a vertical block to represent what it would actually look like. Taking that, we can say, well, S has P, therefore it has to have B as well. And H, Hanuman, has P, therefore it must also have B as well. So starting to build. We can also do the contrapositive. If we do not have B, then we're not going to have P. So L and R both do not have B, therefore they will not have P either. Any column where we do not have B, we also will not have P. The symbol I wrote down here, Natalie, was basically saying that L and V have at least 1. So that's, maybe that could be a little bit clearer. What I meant to write there was less than or equal to 1. That's the best way for me to interpret that. A sentence like this might require a little bit of flexibility or creativity to symbolize it as neatly as possible for yourself. To me, I'm saying L and V, at least one, is the same. You could even write L plus V less than or equal to 1 equal, but then to me, that might get a little bit overcomplicated with the symbols. So I personally chose to leave that out. You could just write it as a sentence if you wanted to. It's really your personal choice. I don't think this is not a common enough rule that I think, or a simple enough rule that I think there's really a clean way you might do it realistically on test day. And that's the one rule I think is actually hardest to remember. And so maybe I would start or something saying, make sure to come back and check that one even more so than the others, since the others are perhaps more built into the diagram itself. Then finishing off this final rule, and then I'll address your question, Ariel. P, not A. So any deity answering pujas cannot answer Arjans. So P requires not A, contrapositive, A requires not P. You could, again, of course, do the double not arrow if you wanted to. Or you could say P and A will never be in the same column. Since we can represent that visually given our diagram, since our diagram has A, B, J, P getting stacked up, I might put it vertically like I just drew as it would appear on the diagram itself. So anywhere we have P, we're not going to have A. So that shows up most neatly, or that shows up already in H and S. So Hanuman and Shiva both have P, therefore they will not have A. Now with Hanuman here, we don't have A there. We have one slot remaining we have to fill. Who's going to go there? J, exactly. So that one gets filled in right away. Other ones, we don't know. Matt's saying it's complete. Yes. So thank you. So the Hanuman column is complete. We can box that off. Since it's done, nothing else can fit there. That one's complete. It's full. H and K are done. Others might be more open-ended. Now, Ariel, you had a question about drawing this rule as a conditional statement. So like the way you might do in a classic like grouping in-out selection game, or like in a logical reasoning question. Is that what you're getting at? Like a chain of sorts, linking them together conditionally?
Yeah, basically. And what kind of tipped me off to even write that last rule as a conditional statement is the first word that starts with any. So I felt that that was an indicator word in my mind. So I was like, okay, how can I kind of simplify this rule in a way that makes sense to me? And how I did that was by writing it as a conditional statement.
Yeah, you certainly could. So you could do something like P requires positive B and negative A, like that?
Yeah, like that, but I wrote it out, but exactly the same.
So you wrote it more like an English sentence versus a symbol?
Yeah, so I just literally wrote like if P, B and not A, and then the contrapositive. If not B or A, then not P.
Yeah, exactly. And for those curious, the contrapositive would be negative B, then negative P, positive A. Did I mix those up there? Let me rewrite that. Not B, then not P. Also A requires not P.
Right.
So yeah, so that's one way you could do it if it were a grouping in-out game. I personally chose to go a different route with this because, I'm just going to erase this because it can get kind of cluttered. Because on the left here, I wanted to represent how it might actually appear on the diagram itself. So P and B, vertical block, P and not A, negative PA, or P and A can't be together, vertical not block, representing the constraints there or limitations there. So I'll try to make it as visually literal to what it will be on the diagram itself. Just the style I choose to go in to make it as literal, as simple as possible, just for the same reason I don't like the checks and X's style within a grid, because it requires a lot of translation. I want to keep it looking clean, like the diagram will look the same exact way. Now, there are still some more inferences we could draw. Did anybody fill in anything additional on top of what I have here? So we have a lot of folks saying A and V are together. Yeah. So how do we know that V has A? Anybody want to tell me why? Yeah, Madison.
I did that because I didn't write V and H as your double arrow. I did like V then H, and then I did the contrapositive. So then that told me that anything that's in H cannot be in V. And so I was just more clear on my page. So then I basically had to knock out J, B, and P from V, and all that's left is A.
Perfect. So as we filled in more on H, once we listed that B and J went there, we could then have gone forward and said B and J cannot be on V. So as a result, only A could go there and V is done. Exactly. Well done. And then Ariana said L and V both have A because L and V have to share at least one. So for that reason, A is going to have to go on L as well. And maybe we'll have J there. Maybe we won't. It's impossible to say. But L will have at least A and possibly J on top of it. What about R? What's happening there? We haven't put anything on R. Yeah, Nika says she put A/J. Ariana says she put J/A. Yeah. So we have these dual options here. There's some ambiguity. R will have one of A, J, since it cannot have B or P. And maybe it will have the other one of J/A as well. We don't know. Now, R is done. L is done as well. We already have that P and B cannot go there, so we can't build any further. But what about any requirements on L and R? Are they fixed with the two? Are they going to have only one? Anything else we could say there? And Natalie, yes, the dashed line means we could possibly have both open-ended. So I use it to represent some ambiguity or flexibility about where we can go next. Casey, your comment, can you share more?
Yeah, so we know that only K and one other deity can answer two students' prayers. So since K is already done, then if L has J and A, then R only has J or A, not both,
yes.
And vice versa.
Yes, exactly. So we can't have both L and R having exactly two. So we couldn't have L and R both having A and J, because that would violate that second half of the third rule. K has exactly 2, and then exactly one other will have exactly 2. That one other could be L, could be R, could be S, could be G. Lots of flexibility remaining here. We can say that S will have both P and B, and S will possibly have J as well. We just know it cannot have A. And then G, Ganesha, has B for Bobby. As for what else it could have, we can't say. It might have J. It might have A. It might have P. It's not going to have all of those, though, because P and A conflict. So G has 1, possibly 3. Open-ended. Lots of ambiguity here, lots of flexibility here. But you see, we can fill in quite a bit. And that's part of the point of this game, is that there is a lot you can do up front, and you can seemingly just keep going and going and going. Do you need all this? Certainly not. I think if you had the more concrete columns filled in, that would be plenty. It would be more than enough. By concrete columns, I mean the ones with H, K, and V, because they're defined. Like learning that V has A only is awesome. Knowing that K is filled in is awesome. Knowing H is filled in is also awesome. Then the other ones, G, L, R, S, they have a lot of flexibility. That's okay. You can fill that in more as you need to over the course of the game for the specific scenarios. That's where all the hypotheticals remain. There's a lot contained within this in terms of different permutations, different roads you could go down, but I would want you to at least have the HKV columns filled in well. And the relatively less you do up front, the more you'll be doing over the course of the game. Not necessarily a bad thing. But you see, even having those 3 knocks out question number 1 right off the bat. Question number 1 is asking, for how many can we determine exactly which students' pairs are answered? Anybody want to tell me? Yeah, shoot, please. Yeah. Natalie's got it. Maurice's got it. Yeah, 3. Exactly 3. So answer is B as in Bravo. Specifically, again, H, K, V. We know exactly what is happening for those columns. We know exactly which students are associated with those deities. Other ones, far more open-ended. Ariel says, did anyone have the students as the base instead of the deities? So when we were first setting up this game, before I showed you my approach, had anybody started doing it the other way? Yeah, Casey says she did. Jack did. Did either of you? Samantha did. Chris did. Yeah, I mean, it's a 50-50 coin flip, seemingly, in some way. Anika says she was going to, then saw the rules and switched. That would probably be my approach. I agree with Casey. There are advantages to doing it either way. Did anybody try sticking with students as the base throughout this whole thing and see what it ended up like? It's okay if you did. It's good. In fact, I'm curious to hear what your experience might have been like if you went about it the other way. No, did folks generally switch midway through to the way I was doing it? And that would be a lot easier to follow this whole class if you stuck with my way. I think the flipping around could be a bit complicated, at least for a live setting like this. So Casey, what was your experience like doing it in the past with the students as the base? You said that you saw yourself finding or deriving inferences at different points.
Yeah, it's funny because I actually did this game last night, not knowing that we were going to do this today. So this was like my setup, like up here with the students on the right. I think I made the same exact inferences going through both sets, but it was just like I saw earlier that V had to go on A and H was set. So I don't know. I see both ways, but I think I'd have to go through all the questions to see if one really did help me more so than others, than the other way.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, we've got a few minutes remaining, so I think it might be interesting to flip it around and start over the other way and see where we go. Anybody want to try it that way and see where we end up? Let's play with it and see where we go. All right, so I just erased everything. We're going to start over totally fresh. So we've got, I'm going to do it actually the same style as I like the slots. And we'll stack the 7 deities on top. So neither L nor R does Bobby, but G and K both do. H, K, S all go with Pooja. H does at least 3. So I'll say H has greater than or equal to 3. K and exactly one other do exactly 2. If V does 1, then H does not do that 1. So this time I would do V and H as a vertical not block, because that reflects to me more like what it would appear to be on the diagram itself. So right now we see H in the P column. So I'm going to see that V does not go in that column, and maybe some other inferences too. And yeah, Madison, I agree that those rules I've drawn over here, those are a bit more abstract in this style. In the other style, it's a bit more concrete. So in this style, you've got to look back there frequently and refer back to it to make sure you don't forget. Of course, it could still be complicated on the other style too, especially that K and exactly one other doing exactly 2. That is a bit more abstract in general. And yes, Matt, you're right that H, it turns out H can only be equal to 3 because no deity answers the prayers of all 4 students. And we also have additionally that final conditional saying P and A conflict. So you're right that in practice we'll discover later, or you could even say now if you want, that H is really going to be equal to 3. H is not going to be 4. So we can revise that based on other information aside from what's written in the rule directly and say simply H equals 3. You're correct in the end. So we got V and H conflict. We're also going to have that G and R conflict. We've got G in the Bobby column, and we already have the rule that R cannot be in that column, so nothing else to write additionally, but we'll keep this to the side and note it for going forward. We have L and V share exactly 1. This rule, I think, becomes nicer in this style because we could put a vertical block saying L and V happens at least once. So here we have, this time, I would say maybe a greater than or equal to 1 to say that it occurs at least once. Now, the final rule, P, if P has something, then B will have it as well, but A will not. This one, I think, can also be a bit nicer in this style because if P has it, then B does as well. So I might do an arrow of some kind. Maybe you want to loop it over the top instead to avoid J getting in the way. Or you might say, and then of course you have the other one, P and A cannot be together. So we have an issue where we want to do something like this. Oops, I should do it. Or you could even say with a slash. So A has it, then P does not. P has it, then A does not. It's a double arrow. And then P requires B. I'm curious if anyone had a different style of representing that idea. I know that's a bit much. And yes, so now I would list everything in the P column in the B column as well, since we know P requires B. So S, K, and I'll erase the list of variables at the top to make some more space. So SKH were all in the P column. Now they're all going to be in the B column as well. And then we also know that P and A are mutually exclusive. So anything in the P column will not be in the A column. You could do this double not arrow, or if you find it to be a little bit much, a little bit messy, as I probably would as well, I would instead just list, okay, well, SKH are in the P column. Therefore, none of them will be in the A column. And yes, Madison, I agree that one clever workaround would be to, instead of listing them in alphabetical order, A, B, J, P, you might instead put them in a different order with, as you're doing exactly, P in the middle between A and B, so that you can more neatly represent those arrows. So you could say P requires B and P and A mutually exclusive. But as you're noting, how would you know this until you got to this point? I don't recommend reading all of the rules first in full and interpreting them all in full before even starting your main diagram. That might take too long. It might not be that impactful anyway. And then you might be reading things multiple times. So this is a hindsight's 2020 kind of thing. I agree that this is probably neater and better than the one above, given all the craziness with the arrows I was just playing with. But would you see it up front? I can't say you automatically would. But yes, this way would be better in the end. I think it would be nicer if that last rule were first, because then maybe you'd see it more quickly and reorient yourself accordingly. Ariel says, kudos to everyone who did the students as the base. Yeah, I mean, it seems a lot more complicated to me than the other way does. But maybe if you did it from the start, it wouldn't be so bad. But you're going to end up growing very long columns here because you have 7 variables as deities to potentially list there. Anything else before we wrap up this class for the evening? All right, folks. Well, if not, thanks all for joining. Hope you found this useful. Reach out with any feedback, any questions, any comments. We have the group coaching mastermind happening now for Supreme Course students. Links in your email from an hour ago. Hope to see you all there. Everyone else, of course, feel free to reach out. Have a good night. Bye all.